Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us for our lunchtime chats with Tlingit Haida. My name is Richard Chachyachish Peterson, and I'm the president of Tlingit Haida. The purpose of these special forums is to help make sure our tribal citizens are informed voters in the 2020 elections. This week's lunchtime chat is structured into two segments. The first 30 minutes will be covering ballot measure 2, and the last 30 minutes will be joined by Congressman Don Young to answer some questions. To get us started, I want to first explain that we were not able to secure a representative from the Vote No on 2 group, also known as Defend Alaska's Elections, but we are joined today by Scott Kendall, who represents the Vote Yes on 2, also known as Alaskans for Better Elections. Since we are not able to provide a debate format for ballot measure 2, I'll be asking Scott some questions that directly address some of the concerns from the opponents of ballot measure 2. And saying that, I want to make it clear to folks that Tlingit Haida is taking an unbiased, nonpartisan role. And so we're only asking those because to make sure that there is a balance. So I'd like to welcome Scott Kendall. And Scott, if you could introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you, President Peterson. It's great to see you again, and thank you to everyone on the line. Yeah, Scott Kendall. I'm an attorney by trade. I've worked in the past for Senator Ted Stevens, Senator Lisa Murkowski. Most recently, many of you know me from my role as Chief of Staff to Governor Walker for the last 2 years of his administration. But I truly appreciate the opportunity to take questions. I think that's a real vital part of this. We're really excited about ballot measure 2, but good information is always better. So thank you for the opportunity.
You bet. Thank you, Scott. We appreciate you joining us and helping us, provide this information and make sure that, again, our tribal citizens are as informed and have as much information when they cast their ballot. As I mentioned before, we were not able to get a representative from the Defend Alaska's Election Vote No group, but we have pulled together a slide to share information on their position against ballot measure 2. Mainly the group's position is ballot measure 2 would force Alaskans to elect political leaders using so-called ranked choice voting, in which voters assign a rank to multiple candidates rather than voting for just one. It results in many voters having their ballots thrown out and leads to candidates winning without a majority of the votes cast. Ballot measure 2 would throw out Alaska's entire system for conducting elections and replace it with a dangerous scheme that has failed in other states. And again, I'll also repeat, these are not the opinions of Tlingit Haida. We're taking kind of a neutral in providing this forum, but that is the stance of those for Vote No. And so anyhow, ballot measure number 2, Alaska's top 4 ranked choice voting and campaign finance laws initiative. A yes vote supports making changes to Alaska's election policies, including requiring persons and entities that contribute more than $2,000 that were themselves derived from donations, contributions, dues, or gifts to disclose the true sources as defined in law of the political contributions. It would be replacing partisan primaries with open top 4 primaries for state executive, state legislative, and congressional offices, and establishing ranked choice voting for general elections, including the presidential election, which voters would rank the candidates. A no vote opposes the ballot initiative to change several of Alaska's election policies, including the adoption of top 4 primaries, ranked choice voting for general elections, and new campaign finance disclosure requirements. So, Scott, these are the questions. So while other places may use one component of this proposed system, no other state, city, or country has all 3. Can you give an overview of the 3 parts of the ballot measure 2? And you have 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, President Peterson. I'll try to be brief. So we've got three parts to fix what we think are three structural issues with our current election system. So issue one is we have a two-ballot partisan primary system. Even though political parties don't appear in our Constitution, our public funds go to run a primary system that's for the parties, even though 62% of Alaskans choose not to affiliate with either major party. So you end up with public officials who are beholden to their party base rather than their own, all of their constituents. So we fix it by having a single ballot. Every candidate, regardless of party, goes to every voter, regardless of what party they're with, if any party at all. So you get every selection. You want to vote for a Republican for US Senate, you can do that. You want to vote for a Democrat or an independent for the state house race, you can do that. Very simple. You pick your favorite, and the top four move on to the general election. In the general election, we have what's called ranked choice voting. So it's as simple as counting to four. You have numbered bubbles, and you put the number by your order of pick. Number one being the best, number four being the worst. And really, it just asks you, if your candidate is in last place and can't impact the outcome of the election, do you want to express a preference between the remaining candidates? Most voters would say yes, but importantly, our ballot measure says if you want to vote for one and only one, then that's your right, and your vote will be counted just like it is today. The final provision is dark money, and that's prohibiting dark money, rather. And dark money is the money that runs a lot of the ads you see now. In the good old days, before 2010, before Citizens United, candidates ran their campaign, people donated to them. It was relatively straightforward. 2010, the Supreme Court said money equals speech, and corporations and individuals can spend unlimited amounts. The problem is that rule has been abused. People funnel their money through subsequent intermediary organizations. And when you ultimately see the campaign spending, the problem is it doesn't show the wealthy individual or corporation that made the donation. What it shows on the ad is Americans for Apple Pie or Alaskans for Strong Families, essentially made up pass-through groups. This ballot measure would prohibit that. If you're going to spend money in our elections, Alaskans will know your name.
Great, thank you for that, Scott. Moving on to the next question. Do you see that this measure fixes the state's polarized politics by depriving political parties of influence and allowing moderate candidates to win?
Regardless of the individual's political affiliation or leanings, there are conservative districts, there are liberal districts, but what it does indeed is break that stranglehold that political parties have over their elected officials. For example, we've had this past primary is just an example. We had several prominent Republicans lose in their primaries as a result of only 5 or 6% of their constituents voting against them. So the most ideologically extreme 5 or 6% decided the fate of public officials. And I think we need to ask ourselves, as Alaskans, where largely we don't affiliate with parties, isn't there a better way than that? Can't we have all voters decide what choices we see rather than an extreme few? So yes, instead of right now, public officials are incentivized towards division because they'll get reelected by their party in the primary, which normally means a victory in the general. What this does is it says you are accountable to a majority of your constituents, regardless of their political affiliation. And it just puts the voters one more step closer to accountability for their public officials and incentivizes bipartisanship rather than incentivizing division the way the current system does.
Great, thank you. Opponents say that this measure could install a system that amounts to trickery, disenfranchising voters. What can you offer in response to that?
That's a scare tactic. What we've seen is, I always believe the proof's in the pudding. And what we've seen across the country where these reforms, and by which I mean open primaries and ranked choice votings, where it's been put into place, turnout has gone up in open primaries up to 50% on the first election. Turnout in ranked choice voting goes up 15 or 16%. So the current system disenfranchises voters, specifically non-party voters. This system will tell every elected official, you need to go out, no trickery, you've got to go get 50% plus one of the electorate to support you. That's not a high burden. And frankly, if you can't If you can't convince a bare majority of your electorate to support you, then you don't have any business in public office. None of this trickery with spoiler candidates. And one thing that's very convincing to me is, again, the proof's in the pudding, what we've seen from diverse candidates, and by which I mean candidates of color and women candidates, is that under these reforms, their representation, their winning elections goes through the roof. Across the country, 22% of all mayors across the country are male, or are female, excuse me, 22%. If you go across the country and go to ranked choice voting jurisdictions, women are 49% of those mayors. And the same thing is seen by candidates of color. Once ranked choice voting goes into place, these candidates can break through the party barriers, and all of a sudden, the elected officials represent the complexion of their community. For example, in Alaska, 40% of Alaskan voters qualify as people of color, 40%. But only 14% of elected officials are people of color. There's a disconnect, and this will fix it.
Great, thank you. Opponents also say this measure would add confusion to the voting process. What's your response to that?
Yeah, I would offer it, I'd kind of talk about both pieces. So currently, our primary system, for example, there's 2 ballots. Actually, if there's a ballot measure, there's a 3rd ballot that's just ballot measures. But at a minimum, there's 2 ballots in our primary election. And if you are an R, a U, or an N, you can vote either ballot. But if you're a D, a G, an AIP, an L, and there may be another couple, you can only vote this ballot over here. So what's more confusing? 1 ballot, you show up and you pick your favorite, or 2 ballots and you're not really sure which ballot you get and why, and who's going to appear on other ballots. I've worked for candidates, and we have had voters call us and be horrified. I got a ballot, but you weren't on it because they got the wrong ballot. That's confusing. When you go to ranked choice voting, so talking about the general election, very simple. We believe Alaskans can count to 4. We believe strongly they can, because in their mind, they're making those decisions. When you have a prominent 3-way race, talk about Senator Murkowski's write-in campaign. Voters looked at the ballot and they had Joe Miller, they had Scott McAdams, they had Lisa Murkowski. In their mind, voters were making qualified choices between that because they didn't have the ability to rank. Many voters went there and said, I'm going to vote for this person, not because they're my first choice, but because I really don't want that person to win. Rather than make them go through that exercise, we're telling them, go to the polling place and vote sincerely. Who do you love? Give them a 1. Who do you like okay and can live with? Give them a 2. So it's very intuitive. It's how we make decisions in real life. I say if I'm going to the car lot and I need to buy a truck, and I go to the Ford dealership and I want an F-150, and I get there and they're all out, do I just leave in a Ford Taurus? Do I take the opposite? Or do I go across the street to the Chevy dealership and get a truck there? That's what our election system says. It says, get what you want or get the exact opposite. And what we're saying is people are a little bit complicated. Some people are conservative on social issues, but moderate on other issues, and vice versa. And shouldn't their choices reflect that?
Great. How would the measure require outside groups to disclose the source of all contributions above 2,000 within 24 hours?
Yeah, so that's, and it's important to know, this doesn't affect candidates. So if you're just a state house candidate or a school board candidate in a rural area, no one's allowed to give you $2,000. So this applies just to the super PACs. So the super PACs are over there raising largely anonymous money. And when someone donates $2,000 or more, they can go onto the Alaska Public Offices Commission website and fill out a form that literally takes 90 seconds and disclose that, rather than what we have in the status quo, which is a lot of times the money comes in so fast and furious, we don't know till after election day, when it doesn't do us any good, who's paying for these ads. The other thing it says is, rather than use these intermediary groups to cut checks and basically launder money, we're going to say that every person accepting a check $2,000 or more, or donating a check $2,000 or more, has to certify that that's the true source of the money. No more putting it through these intermediary groups. If you're going to spend money and try to convince Alaskans, then we're going to know your name and we're going to know who you are. And then that can figure into what we think of your commercials in terms of what your motivations are.
Great. So would the disclosures apply to ballot measures and referenda too?
No, they don't. There's actually two separate bodies of law. Citizens United changed law about candidates and allowed unlimited spending. Ballot measures have always, for whatever reason, allowed unlimited spending. This measure was, honestly, it had enough components that we were already challenged in court, but that would certainly be a worthy project. I think the same rules should apply. There's just a higher level of concern, especially about candidates, because of course a ballot measure is words on paper. You can understand what it is and what it does. Whereas candidates, the concern is always, if someone secretly funneled $5 million to help them get elected and we don't know who they are, is that having an undue influence on the candidate? So I think the ballot measure and referenda question, I think that should be next. I think frankly, the legislature should pick it up and pass it in January. But it was critically important to know who's trying to influence our elected officials. And so that's why we took this approach first.
Great. So Washington State and California have a top two state primary in which the top two vote getters advance. Nebraska uses a variation of the top two system. No state has the top four idea proposed for Alaska. Why was top two not considered?
So top two was considered, but what we saw, because of course we want to have competition and we want to have accountability to voters, what we saw was, well, if you take the 40 House districts, well, maybe 25 or 30 of them, you'd end up with 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats. And that's going to disenfranchise a huge swath of voters. And what we want voters to have is someone who brings their issues to the general election. Even if you come in third, that person will have someone to root for. And we'll have an actual choice, not just maybe a very conservative Republican and a slightly less conservative Republican, or a very liberal Democrat and a slightly less liberal Democrat. And it was really guided by, the North Star to us in all of this was the 62% of Alaskans who say, we're not with either major party. So you need to have that, one, top 4 guarantees that you'll always have, if they run, at least one of every major party. So you've got a Democrat and a Republican if they choose to run. But it's also going to allow other candidates, unconventional candidates, to come in and say, I've got this very local issue. There's this resource development project in my district. I feel very strongly about it. The Democrats aren't with me, the Republicans aren't with me, but I'm taking that issue. And if they can build up enough support to be in the top 4, then they're taking that issue to the general election and their voters are coming with them. So this is all about more choice and more engagement. So that's why we got to top 4.
Well, Scott, this is unusual for us. We really don't have any questions from the audience, even though a lot of people are really expressing their appreciation in the comments about the information. I've personally been asked, my opinion on the ballot measures, and this certainly helps. Is there anything that you'd like to add that we didn't ask, or?
Yeah, I guess, and this is a broad question. And it's kind of a question from me to the voters. I would say to the voters, do you feel like the system is working? Do you feel like what we're getting now is good representation? Or do you talk to your elected officials and they say, oh yeah, I'd solve that problem, but I got to get reelected first? I think we broadly agree. We need education. We need public safety. We need ferries. We need public health. Alaskans, I think across the board, 80% or more, and yet these things become political football in a partisan environment. So I guess I'd ask the voters to ask themselves, wouldn't a little more accountability be an improvement? Wouldn't a system that rewards bipartisanship rather than punish it be a better system? Let's give it a shot. Let's see if we can get better results. Because when I talk to Alaskans, I know what they value. I share those values. And yet we're not seeing it from our elected officials. So let's find a better way.
Great. I'm looking at the chat now, and we have a really good question, or kind of a commentary from a dear friend of mine, Millie Schoonover and Craig. Most people, and this is from her, most people have not been educated on this way of voting. They may decide, the heck with it, I'm not going to vote. There should have been state people letting us know. Help. What's your comment to that?
Well, one of the things that's super important, and I agree with that sentiment, we've got 2 years to educate voters. You're going to show up at the polling booth this year, if you haven't already, and your ballot's going to look just like it's always looked. So we've got a burden, which is 2 years to educate voters. This is how it works now. You should show up for the primary, even if you don't affiliate with a party, because there's a ballot and it's got every single candidate on it. That's for you. You should show up in the general, because no matter what, you're going to have 2 or 3 or 4 choices on the ballot, rather than sometimes no choice at all. So I think that she's exactly right. But of course, we who've supported this measure in the division of elections, the burden is on us to educate voters, because again, it's different, but it is not challenging. What we've seen out of states that have done this is that there's no higher error rate. People vote as successfully. And what's even more encouraging is once they do it once, they love it. 90% of people who vote this way find it a pleasant or easy experience, and they want to keep it. Because if you told people you can have 2 choices or you can have 4 choices, what are you going to choose? You're always going to benefit from having more choices. And I don't know about the people on the call, but how many of us have gone to the ballot and literally looked at the ballot and said, these are my choices, I want something else. So again, the burden's on us, and we will educate Alaskans about it.
So a question from Kinsey Andrew Martin. So this is only applicable to state of Alaska voting and not national?
That's a great question. So this is applicable to every election that the state runs. And so that's that actually includes federal elections. So president, senator, US Congress, governor, state house, and state senate are all going to be on this ballot. What it won't impact are your local elections. So if you live in a municipality or a borough that runs its own elections, they're going to run their elections their way. But the vote for president will be ranked choice voting. The vote for US Senate will be ranked choice voting all the way down.
Right. So a follow-up question from Kinsey is, will this be an amendment to the Alaska Constitution?
No, actually, the Constitution is fairly silent on elections, other than to say that how elections are run will be defined by statute. So this is a statutory change.
Great. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I guess I would add, and I can put it in the chat here, but please come to our website if you have more questions, alaskansforbetterelections.com. Go to our Facebook. We've got videos for educational purposes. We've got all sorts of myth versus fact, studies that have been done about the positive outcomes of these kind of reforms. And I offer myself up personally. If you see something, you have a question that you don't see answered in our materials, then let me know and we will get it answered for you. And we'll answer it honestly. Not everyone will love what this does, because it does take the power of the parties down a notch. Whereas, right now they're the gatekeepers to the ballot. And this says, no, you can have a Democrat on the ballot, but that independent or that nonpartisan who runs has an equal ability to make the ballot. Not everyone's going to love that. I've experienced that from both ends of the political spectrum, but we're really convinced that most Alaskans want more choices and they want more bipartisanship.
Great. Well, if this measure were to pass, when would it take effect?
So the next, you will see it in the primary election for the very first time in 2022. So the next statewide election. And if it passes, because ballot measures cannot be altered for 2 years, if this passes by ballot measure, we are guaranteed that the 2022 election will be conducted according to these rules.
Great. So then that really if it should pass, that would give the elections and your group that opportunity you were talking about to educate the community. Would that be kind of like a ad campaign, or how do you see educating folks?
I think it's all of the above. I think what you'd see is hopefully a partnership with the Division of Elections. We would assist them in their educational materials. We would conduct all sorts of events and advertisements. Basically, we might reach out, for example, to organizations like yours in a nonpartisan way not to say, hey, we should pass this ballot measure because it will have been passed, but we'll say, how do we reach out to your membership with good information? So the answer to that is all of the above, because absolutely those of us who care about this project want it to be a rousing success.
Great, Scott. Well, questions keep trickling in, and this is great because I think you're really helping formulate those for people. One of our own vice presidents, Tasha Hotch, asked, does this mean independent candidates will no longer be required to collect signatures?
That is exactly right. So I've worked with a number of petition candidates, and to be honest, all of them have hated it, including Governor Walker, Jason Gren. There's been many of them. And the problem they have is the voters don't pay attention necessarily to the primary because they may be a non-party voter. And they say, I've never saw you on the ballot. I went to the primary election. You didn't appear on the ballot. And instead they have to run around and gather signatures, and they can only appear on the ballot in the general, which means their campaign can't really start until September 1st. So now they'll be treated just like the Democrat, just like the Republican. They'll appear on that primary ballot with a U or an N next to their name, and they can start making their case to the voters right away.
Well, I think that was a really great question. That actually helped inform me. That was something I didn't understand. So that's great. Thanks for providing that. Thanks for the great question, Tasha. That pretty much concludes our time with you, Scott. We are waiting for Congressman Young to join us. So if if you have anything else you'd like to add, we did. You can see on the slide we've added your information on both sides so that our viewers can check that out. As you said, check out your website, and then we also include the Defend Alaska's Elections website and Alaska Common Ground. So yeah, thank you for joining us, and thank you for helping inform our audience.
Yeah, thank you, President Peterson, and thank you to everyone who's listened in. I really appreciate it. And to everyone, go vote safely, but make sure you vote. Thank you.
Thank you. You be well.
You too. Thank you.
Well, to the folks tuning in on Facebook Live, we've been putting these together, and of course, our candidates that are all running right now are so busy with everything that we have very strict time with everybody. So we are just waiting for Congressman Young right now. And so just bear with us. He should be on any minute. I get the pleasure of being the moderator here, so sometimes that gives me some latitude. And I want to congratulate a friend and tribal citizen here in Juneau, Rob Edwardson, who just completed his term on the City Borough of Juneau Assembly. And, it was really, I think Rob added quite a bit to the Assembly, and we really appreciate his service. And I'd like to turn and welcome Congressman Young. Congressman Young, thank you for joining us today.
Good to join you. I always sort of enjoy this meeting one-on-one, and the Zoom is a little different to me, but that's what it is and what we're going to do. So thanks for inviting me to speak with you and answer some of your questions.
Thank you. And Congressman, as you've been Alaska's only congressman, I think most people know who you are, but please let me give you the opportunity to introduce yourself to some of the folks who might not know who you are. I don't know where they've been hiding, but
if they don't know who I am, I'm in serious trouble. But I came from California 63 years ago, and worked in Anchorage for a year building houses, and I went north to Fort Yukon, lived in the bush for numerous years, and then finally I got irritated up there. My past wife did, the Athabascan lady, and she said, you're going to run for office in Juneau, a state representative. And I said, what? She said, you're going to run. That's when 7 people ran out of one district. And I lost the first time, 1964. She said, we'll run and win in 66. I ran and won and served as one of the 7 from the Fairbanks region. That used to be the District 19 in Juneau. And that was sort of an exciting period of time in Juneau. We didn't have any money. Our total budget was $365 million for the whole state. Think about that for a moment compared to now. And I represented that area that I did for 4 years. And then I ran for state Senate, and it was all right to be 1 of 7, but not 1 of 2. And I had Republicans, Democrats, and everybody else against me. I still won, and became a senator and hated it. And then that's when I ran for this job in 1972 against Nick Begich, and or for the seat he had, and didn't expect to win, but wanted to be, make a reasonable showing. And we lost him by him flying to Juneau. We haven't found him, and I don't think we ever will. And I got elected in a special session on March 7th, took office March 14th, and this is my 25th election. I believe I represent the state real well. I've passed more laws than any other congressman in Congress in history, signed by 9 different presidents. And I always say my job is to hear what you have on your mind, and we'll discuss it. We'll come up with your solution. I'll work on it legislatively, and we'll try to solve a problem you're faced with. That's being a congressman for all of Alaska and all Alaskans, and I've done that job. I'm asking for your support again because I'm good at what I do. And very frankly, when somebody runs against me, I want to be competent. I want them to understand this state. I don't want them to just run to be the Congress lady or the congressman. I want them somebody that loves this state like I do.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Congressman Young. So we have a series of questions that we've come up with, and then should time allow, we'll take some questions from our Facebook Live audience. You mentioned working for us and us coming up, giving you our concerns. Of course, now in this time of COVID-19 and the pandemic, how will you work to ensure that every Alaskan community has a full-time or otherwise adequate public safety and emergency response presence?
Well, we're hoping to work through the state like we've done before. The CARES Act took care of some of that. We expect to have a vaccine. We just noticed there's going to be, I don't know how many, 200,000 or more fast tests being shipped to Alaska. That's going to help out a lot. And that will actually help us identify where it's increasing, where it's decreasing. And I will suggest one thing, though. We have a responsibility ourselves, not just the government can solve this all. If you want to wear a mask, you should wear a mask. If you want to wash your hands, wash your hands. You want social distancing, be social distance. We have to work together to solve this problem if we're going to do it, with understanding that there isn't I don't think the human being is going to solve this problem altogether, because we've had pandemics before. This one's got more publicity, but we've had them before. And what really worries me, what happens if we have another one this coming flu season, like we call it 25? Are we going to hunker down? If we hunker down, the communities cannot survive. It's amazing to me that people don't understand that you can't hide. You have to say and accept and try to protect by your own self-responsibility. Everybody says, well, the government's going to solve the problem. You depend on the government to solve the problem, you're going to be really sick.
Thank you, Congressman. Moving on, do you support the expansion of tribal co-management in the current dual management systems? And if so, what will you do to increase support in this 117th Congress in your first 100 days?
Well, in 100 days, if you look, I've been trying to work with OTNA. There's a pilot program up here about co-management. Not the big one, it's fish and game. That's a real problem because the state says the state has control over it. That's going to be a real, battle because you have to sell it to the public. But I do believe, why should we expect the federal fish and game to manage fishing game on your land? I've never understood that. I think the co-management works a lot better. Then we go a little bit further. I've been working and trying to get the NOAATAC area to make sure they have a right to run the Park Service. And I've got a lot of support now from the Secretary of Interior, is trying to work together with the regional corporations and the villages within, so there is a joint effort of management of that land. Again, there's a lot of problems within the state. People in the state say, well, you don't have any right to this. It is your land. And I think you should have a right to manage it. But I think it should be co-management. And that's the problem we have. Some people don't want it. They want the state to manage it, not the federal government.
Right. Congressman, this next question, I've actually sat in your office and talked to you about this topic, but do you support a legislative or an administrative fix to address the Marine Mammal Protection Act's blood quantum issues for Alaska Natives? If so, how will you build the support in Washington, D.C. to accomplish this?
Well, the one thing, if you're talking about marine mammals, that's one of my big complaints. We have some real problems, and I try to suggest to you and everybody else, should be managing that is the state with the native corporations to manage the marine mammals. And our biggest problem in the Southeast, of course, is the sea otter. But we also go into the seals themselves in some areas. And now we've got the problem of whales eating an awful lot of our fishies, especially the salmon as they come out of the streams of Tyonek. We have fish getting, whales eating our salmon as they come out of the streams. We can't just allow the federal government to manage something that has no real interest in. Take the sea otter and Sitka. They shut down that one operation over there that made the skins viable. And I'm just saying it's better to have you manage it. I did introduce a bill that allowed harvesting of the sea otters by the native villages, setting the numbers necessary. And I did get some pushback from Alaska natives. They said, well, what will happen is they'll send all the furs to China and they'll make trinkets out of it and send them back. We can fix that. We just won't allow any sea lion's fur to come back into the United States. But we have to have a value to the fur more than just small things, but the real full-length sea otter coat is probably the best coat I've ever seen. So I'm working on it. I think we can do it. It's going to take a lot of effort. The blood quantum issue, I want, frankly, I'm not sure I'd solve about the quantum part of it. I think you had some ideas and suggestions, and I'll look at those, but I want to work on the marine mammals. That's the one that I want you to manage. I want you to harvest. I want them to be able to take and manage the herd as it should be and not let it just run wild at our cost, by the way, your cost, because it hurts our crab, it hurts our sea urchin, and it hurts kill our abalone. So that's something we're working on. Again, if you've got ideas, let's do it.
Great. Thank you, Congressman. With the current price of oil and an uncertain future, what are your solutions and priorities to responsibly shore up and diversify our economies in both our urban centers and rural communities?
Well, again, this is something, first place, I don't like the idea the state becomes totally dependent on oil. I warned them many years ago, don't take and depend on a product you can't control the price of. And every time it drops down, we wring our hands and, what are we going to do? And then the price goes back up, nobody pays any attention. We saw this, I believe, in 1988 or 86, it went down to $8 a barrel. And did we do anything? No, it went back to $140 a barrel, and everybody said, this is good. Now it's down to $60 or $58 a barrel, and people are still wringing their hands. So you have to diversify, and the way you diversify is by adding into communities the ability to develop those resources, and that means development of our energy sources. Southeast, for instance, you ought to have more hydropower sites. And you have to have more geothermal up north, and you have to have hydropower sites. Cheap energy, which adds value to our resources, is the key to diversification. We have not done that. We have a fair job in Southeast, but it's not as good as it should be. We have the intertie there. We built Blue Lake and Sitka. We've had some other projects, but we shouldn't be burning any diesel fuel at all in Southeast. And then I want a bigger program up north. We could go as far north as Bethel and have hydropower. But we never had the plan because it wasn't necessary. But until we do that, we can't really utilize the resources we got.
Thank you. What do you think Alaska's economy is going to look like after the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, that's the question. Are we going to get over the COVID-19, or is there going to be another one? You have to reanalyze how did we handle it, where we're going, and what we have to do. The economy, of course, got hurt in the Southeast big time because of the tourist industry is another example. I remember fighting for the logging industry in the Southeast, including Alaska, logging industry. And everybody said, we don't need logging. We'll live off tourism. And that's great when the economy's good. But I warned them then, tourism is surplus money. That's people have extra money, so they go on a cruise. We expected 1,400,000 people coming to Alaska this summer. We didn't get them, and it hurt big time. I've been to Ketchikan, Sitka, Juneau, those areas there, Wrangell, Petersburg, it hurt them big time. And it goes further north too. So I just think what we have to think about, how do we get to cheaper power? How do we work it out? how do we take and handle it and increase the tourism? But I have to say one thing about it. I think the industry has really done a job trying to improve to the public that their safety factor is real good. We have to make sure that we do the same thing in the villages so that they feel safe when they leave the ship. What I don't want them to leave the ship, get on the ship's bus and go to a ship's concession and get back on the ship. That doesn't help the local communities. I want to make sure they understand they have to get into the communities, but the communities have a responsibility is to make sure they are safe so they can go through this whole process.
Thank you. Can I get your thoughts on the federal government's responsibility to respectfully and meaningfully engage with tribal governments?
Oh, this is one of my big battles. I work on it all the time. A lot of talk happens, but I've been trying to tell people, you know, this self-governing, this responsibility, government has to be a better way to take and manage the Alaskan and American Indians, in the sense that there has to be that mutual understanding. You are and have been a self-government unit if we allow you to do. You know, I listen to the opposite side all the time. And do me a favor, I'm going to be very, very political here. Has a Democrat Congress ever done for the American Indian Alaska Native? Nothing. And I say that respectfully. You look at all the major laws were signed by a Republican president and passed by Republican Congresses, because we do believe in that government relationship back and forth. And I will completely always argue that you're right. And you check my record, I'm pretty good on that.
Thank you, Congressman. That wraps up our questions, and now we are going to open up for questions from our viewers. And I'll go ahead and start from Molly and Doug Porter. Congressman Young, do you see or anticipate any movement in the Alaska Natives without land?
I'm very proud of the group Without Land, because you actually came up with a solution. You pick lands, you work with the Forest Service, you work with the communities. I've got to convince the people now this is an Alaska Native issue. Some of them think it's an issue to get into the timber. And I believe, I talked to the chairman, Grijalva. He's a little bit far out, but he respects my position. I believe we will have movement on that bill. Again, though, this job is not just doing everything one day. If we get it moved in a lame duck session, which we'll have, then we may not get it through the Senate. So that means immediately, and beginning January 3rd, I'll reintroduce that bill, and then we'll work for it. So this is a slow process. I expect to get this one done, because you guys have done a great job in selection of lands and really getting accepted. Everybody seems to accept the idea that this should be done. So I'm optimistic we will have movement. Finalization this session, maybe not. And I don't know what the Senate's going to do. It's one of those things I can't control.
Thank you. From one of our tribal delegates to Tlingit Haida, Paulette Marino, Congressman Young, the Vietnam Veterans Allotment Act was passed. The veterans' current land selection is in the interior of Alaska. Many of our veterans would like land in Southeast Alaska that is accessible and livable. What ideas do you have that would help this process?
Well, first, let me say that was my bill, and I probably made one mistake. I didn't make it so you could get land in Southeast because it's reserved. And right up front with you, I probably didn't put it in so you could, because it probably wouldn't have passed right up front. So I had to think about that. So what we're trying to do now is reintroduce a bill for Southeast as part of that land selection that I was just talking about. If I can, I've got another bill already in for communities getting land of 2 million acres. And I have made some progress in that, because the land at that time was reserved when we became a state. So none of the communities got any land. And then what we have to try to do is that the veterans have access maybe in that 2 million acres per community, because most of the lands that they want to select would be within that 2 million acres in those communities. But that's my idea of an answer to it. It was unfair. I do think maybe I'm wrong, but I'd make a suggestion. Even though you can't select in Southeast, don't turn back on the fact that you maybe select someplace up north and then trade it when we can do it. So at least you did use the option. put a bill in maybe to have, okay, you selected land in the Yukon Flats, for instance. I don't know whether you do that or not, but okay, you selected it as a veteran, and then we try to get land available in Southeast, and then you trade that land in the Yukon Flats and turn around and get it, take it down in Southeast when we get the surplus of land. But this is a problem that we faced with. It's justified how many years I worked for and got it done. People are forgetting I do have the clout.
Well, Congressman, as a moderator, and Tlingit Haida is really trying to take a nonpartisan, unbiased stance in having these forums and providing the opportunity for all of you running for office to provide information to our citizens. The unique situation with you is you are a long-sitting congressman. So I'm going to kind of take off my unbiased hat for a minute and just say, and you know this very well, American Indians, Alaska Natives are the highest enlisted in our military services, and Alaska Natives even more per capita, coming from a long line of folks that served and military families. It's really, Tlingit Haida works with our veterans very closely, and I can tell you, and they're very appreciative of these efforts, but it stings, especially our Vietnam era veterans. They weren't necessarily welcomed home, and they still carry a lot of that trauma, and then they were left out of this. And so we're appreciative. We work closely with you and Senator Sullivan to really get this pushed through. But I can tell you, it really is offensive and hurts their feelings that they can't select land in their own homelands that they went off to defend. So we really would appreciate those efforts to correct this.
Well, we're going to do that. But again, the opposition doesn't want you to have any land. That's the environmental community, the Nancy Pelosi's and the rest of them. They don't want anything in the Tongass to take any tree. And that's why we have to figure out how we're going to get land available. And it goes back to my 2 million acres of land for Southeast Alaska, where you would have room to take. It's not that much land, by the way. How many veterans do you have in Southeast? If you figured out 160 acres, how many veterans do we have? You have an idea?
I think we have a couple hundred.
Okay, see, let's say you have 100 or 200. And you have 160 acres apiece. What's the total land mass? It's really nothing. I can give you the answer in a minute. I'm working on my computer, but see, here it's ringing. But you follow what I mean? It's 32,000 acres out of how many million acres? 17 million acres. So it's really nothing. It's really 32,000 acres out of the 2 million, which I'm trying to get them. So I'm going to get your land, but I'm just suggesting that if you were to select land up north, we could maybe write a bill when we get the land, you can trade it back. But I just want to, we're working on that. Dan and I are working on it. I think we'll get it done. But again, you have a lot of opposition. You have people, they'll talk about helping the American Indian out in Alaska Native out and turn around and take your land away because they want to leave it pure and pristine.
Congressman, I have a question from Rachel Marino in Sitka. What are you doing about negotiating opening up the Canadian ports for cruise ships to travel to Alaska?
Oh, the question about opening up the cruise ships, I had it that close because Canada did something I didn't think they should have done, but they wanted to quarantine all cruise ships, etc. So they shut down their ports, and I went to Seattle and had it that close to write a law so to go to Seattle. Seattle shut down, and I didn't think we go to Portland. So what I'm trying to do now is get Canada, get the waiver for the Passenger Bill of Rights, so we can either take them out of Seattle, Seattle opens again, forget Canada, or we turn them around in Alaska. People say, what do you mean turn them around? Cruise industry is crucially important. Why do we have to go to Vancouver, for instance? Why don't we just say, okay, Prince Rupert, why don't we just say, okay, let's fly every passenger that wants to go on a cruise ship into Anchorage, down, bus them down or rail them down, probably at a railroad, to the ship, load them on the ship, go down through all the way down to the Southeast, down to Ketchikan. And in Ketchikan, they got that brand new dock down there. They turn them around there, and meantime, they've been flying them into Ketchikan. We take the ones off the ship, and we turn those in the airplane, and the ones that came off the airplane get on the ship. And that way, we would be able to take and forget Canada, do it as we should do it, keep the money in the state of Alaska, in the communities of Alaska. Now, I've talked to the airlines, they like the idea. I've talked to cruise ships, they don't like it too much. But, you know, this possibly could work. In the meantime, if we can do that, we got to go to Seattle. That means we have to change the pasture part of the Jones Act. And I believe we can do that because there's other states involved, Florida primarily. We can do that. So that's how we're trying to get the cruise ships back working. Again, I want to stress the fact, though, I want the cruise ships to know they got to participate in the communities. They don't use a bubble where they get in their bus off the ship and they go to their concession and they get back on the ship. That doesn't help the communities at all.
Congressman, I have a question from Clarice Johnson. Two organizations representing Alaska Native corporations will be appealing the decision to exclude ANCs from the CARES Act funding to the Supreme Court. Do you believe Alaska Native corporations should have the same rights as federally recognized tribes or gain tribal status?
Now, I think they should have the same rights as the lower 48 tribes. It's very clear the existing laws and the laws that we utilize that the ANCs are part of and providers to the tribes. And there are those within the state of Alaska want to destroy the ANCs. And they want to go back under the old BIA system, and it doesn't work. And I question it every time because I don't want to see a good system that now is probably the largest contributor economically to the state of Alaska is the ANCs. I don't understand why would anybody want to destroy that, other than the fact if they do destroy it, then the smaller tribes get under the control of the BIA, and I'm not going to tolerate that.
Thank you. This one also from Clarice Johnson. You supported removing Alaska from the roadless rule. The testimony and comments from Southeast Alaskans was overwhelming in favor of keeping the roadless rule or adapting it to meet Alaska's unique needs. You ignored numerous city and tribal resolutions supporting the rule. Can you explain why you ignored the wishes of the people whose livelihood and culture to depend on the Tongass, the same rights as the Tongass have the same rights are federally recognized tribes or have status as federally recognized tribes?
Well, again, we go back to the idea of ANELCA. You know, you can disagree with me all you want, but we passed that. We thought we'd taken care of the problem. We had a no more clause, and we believe by the Obama administration, it imposed and disallowed the no more clause. I do support lifting the roadless area. You may not support me, but communities have to be able to communicate with one another. Other areas than Alaska Natives have a right to communicate with one another. We have a right, I believe, to development of our other resources. See, Alaska, by the way, develop their resources. I don't understand why other people can't develop. Now, it's not for timber. You're not going to have any timber industry in Southeast of any consequence because you don't have the volume. I mean, everybody's restricted. 17 million acres restricted. And it will be someday, there will be a harvesting of timber in Southeast Alaska. And when they finally wake up to the fact, you have to manage it, and then they can have long-term leases on the new growth timber. The Forest Service does not manage timber. They just try not to harvest any timber. And timber is a valuable resource, and it is renewable. You look at what's happened to most of your regional timber, you harvested it, and have other people say, no, we don't want to harvest anymore, very frankly, is not being realistic. So it's not going to happen now, but it will happen, and I do support lifting the roadless view because we had a no more clause. It was in there, we utilized it, we followed the law. Obama didn't.
Congressman, I respect your time, and I would just ask one last question, and we did get more questions, and we'll maybe forward those to your staff if they would like to provide written response. The last one is, do you think candidates running, this is from Simon Friday, who actually is our emerging leader, it's the youth role on our tribal council. Do you think candidates running for office should have to disclose any money that they've taken from special interest groups to the public? If so, will you do so? And if not, why not?
Well, number one, all my money is exposed all the time. It is transparent. It's in the Federal Election Commission. Each time it's done. I've got another bill though, which I will tell you I'm really pushing for, and we're trying to get it done. I'm trying to get co-sponsors now. Is that the fact is I don't think any statewide candidate can take any money outside their district. And I believe that that'd be to solve this problem. The idea we can have my opponents getting all this money out of Act Blue and not disclose it is nonsense. They say I get money from corporations, but I disclose it. I disclose it all the time, and people don't want to think about that. It's there. You can look it up in your computer. You can find every nickel I've ever got from anybody. And I just still think it's wrong that you have to get the money from outside, because we're spending an awful lot of money on elections we shouldn't do. But if you don't do it, they say you don't want it. And that's the problem we have right now. You look at your mayoral race in Juneau, how much they spent. You look at the mayoral race in Anchorage, it's over $1.5 million for mayor's race. It's just don't spend any money that comes from outside the district. That would solve this whole problem. That's nationwide, mainly for the referendums, because people can come in and promote a referendum, get it on the ballot, and then support it with outside money and decide how we as Alaskans are going to live. If that money only had to come from Alaskans, you wouldn't see that problem. So I'm working on that problem. And for the person that asked that question, check it on the computer. You'll find out where my money comes from.
Great. Again, thank you, Congressman Young. We really appreciate you joining us today. And again, I just ask that if we can provide these unanswered or unasked questions to your staff, if you could provide responses, we'd greatly appreciate that.
We always do. You know that. We're pretty good about that. You've been back to see when we try to answer as many as we can. If they don't answer, let me know.
All right. Thank you, Congressman. Have a good day. Be well and be safe.
God bless.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for tuning in with us. Some important upcoming election dates is November 2nd is the deadline to receive absentee by electronic transmission ballot applications. November 3rd is our general election day. Your ballot must be postmarked by Tuesday, November 3rd, 2020, and received no later than Friday, November 13th, 2020. It's time for our random drawing. This week, our winner, we have really, I'm kind of excited about this. We worked with a company in Cake, and it's called Sagebrush Dry, and they made us berry picking buckets. And the first winner is Isaiah Brown, and then Karen Barnes won one of our hydro flasks. And Isaiah and Karen, if you can private message us your addresses, we'll get those mailed out to you right away. Again, we're really excited to host these. And tomorrow, the next 2 days, we have lunchtime chat. So I think tomorrow we have Dr. Al Gross, who is running for U.S. Senate. And then Friday, we'll have Senator Sullivan. So please tune back in tomorrow from noon to 1, and we'll have the next lunchtime chat. We did get overwhelmed with questions, and I want to really thank you for that. We're really going to make sure push and make sure that those questions that didn't get asked live, that we'll get answers, and we'll post those to our comment section. Thank you all so very much for tuning in with us today. I think it's just incredibly important for us to be informed, to be active voters. And, we have an obligation. I think we have a responsibility and a civic duty as citizens to get out and vote. Make sure that, we're really careful. We're not telling you how to vote, who to support, but we want to make sure you have the information and you get out and you exercise that right. And that not only is it a right, it's a privilege, and we should all exercise that right. Get out and vote. So everybody be well, be safe, and we'll see you back here tomorrow. Thank you.